Jesus, for me, was the person who manifested the Christ essence so fully that everyone could see, oh, this is God. And came here to show us, to teach us that that is our truth, that we too can do this. There's the dark shadow and there's the golden shadow. And the golden shadow, we don't want to accept that any more than we want to accept our dark shadow. We don't want to accept our own divine nature. We will never be free, ever, as long as we're enslaving, as long as we're exploiting any other. If we try to reset humanity, but the one thing we're going to hold on to is the exploitation and the killing of animals, we're going to be exactly where we are sometime in the future again.
Welcome to the Staying Free podcast. In this episode, I spoke with Reverend Carol Saunders, who is an ordained Unity and interfaith minister. A former engineer, she founded and led a Unity church in a Chicago suburb for 10 years. She now hosts the Spiritual Forum podcast and YouTube channel, where she engages in a wide range of spiritual topics with her guests, including discovering your authentic self, transmuting the world's power structures, using discernment, and establishing sovereignty. She also has a blog, wolfandthelamb.com, to encourage spiritually minded people to include all sentient beings in our circle of compassion, which she believes is essential to manifesting freedom. So I first heard about Reverend Carol from my previous guests, Paul and Lauren Bell, who were on episode 63 of the Staying Free podcast. And they had previously been on Carol's podcast, and I then started digging into her other episodes with different guests, and I really found the podcast to be pretty refreshing. There's a lot of different ideas explored there, and I think that Carol has quite an interesting perspective and certainly a unique outlook. So I wanted to bring her on the podcast for a while, and I'm really glad that I did. I definitely enjoyed this conversation. I got the opportunity to ask Carol a bunch of questions which I wanted to ask from listening to her podcast, and we also went in some different and unexpected areas as well, but generally revolving around the theme of religion, spirituality, and veganism and compassion towards animals, which is a philosophy that myself and Carol definitely share, but is often missed out of the conversation in the freedom community. So I really hope you guys enjoy this conversation and get value from it. If you do, make sure you give the episode a like and a share on social media. If you're enjoying the podcast so far, make sure you give it a 5-star review in whichever podcast app you're using. If you're new here, welcome. I definitely recommend that you listen to some of the previous episodes. There's a big backlog there now. And of course, if you enjoy the conversations, give the pod a subscribe too. Finally, if you're not listening to the podcast on the Fountain app, please consider doing that. You have the opportunity to support the show by streaming stats as you listen. You can also get involved in the community. You can leave boosts there. So here are the boosts from the previous episode. PS boosted 100 sats with Let's Fucking Go. Thank you, PS. God's Death 237 sats. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, God's Death. Source All boosted 10,000 sats. Great conversation. Glad to have found your show by way of Nossa and Odell. Freedom's future remains bright. That is a massive donation. Thank you so much for that, Sawzall, and thank you for supporting open source developers. Southside boosted 1,337 sats. Open Sats or Die. Thank you, Southside, for that donation. Yep, Open Sats is an awesome organization, and I am definitely glad to be supporting it. And finally, Kirk boosted 5,137 sats. One of my new favorite pods, and super cool that this boost is going to Open Sats. Thank you, Kirk. I'm really, really glad that you're enjoying the podcast. And thank you for the donation. So just a reminder for those who didn't listen to the last episode, 100% of my Bitcoin donations, whether that's boosts, whether that's streaming sats, or whether that's Lightning or Bitcoin donations, is going to go to Open Sats for the next month. So this is a really good time to donate if you're thinking of doing so. And for all of those who have already sent some sats, thank you so much for those donations. All right, that's enough for the intro. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Reverend Carol Saunders. Reverend Carol Saunders, welcome to the Staying Free podcast. It's really awesome to have you here today. I've been kind of going through your podcast, the Spiritual Forum, and just kind of catching up on all of your episodes and some of the things that you're talking about in prep for this conversation. So I got loads of stuff that I want to talk to you about today. Before I do you just want to give a introduction for my audience as to yourself?
Sure, great. Well, thank you, Johnny. I'm really happy to be here, and it's always great to talk to a fellow podcaster. So I am an ordained Unity and interfaith minister. I had a church, a Unity church in Deerfield, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago, for about 10 years. I shifted that. Oh, before that, my original career was chemical engineering. So I worked for an energy company for 20 years. So I've got that whole science and engineering background as well. I led a church for 10 years. I kind of converted it to a dialogue ministry and started my podcast from there. Since then, I've released the church, and I'm doing a spiritual podcast that really is a wide variety of topics on that kind of centers on hope, inspiration, and awakening. I'm an advocate for animals. I lead an annual retreat at Unity Village that's really about whole planet spirituality. So anybody who is planet conscious and animal loving and spiritual, that's kind of where the intersection is for my retreat. And I also blog with the hopes of awakening people to the animal-human interface and how important that interface is for us to be free, loving, and compassionate and fully express people. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. I live in rural Wisconsin, and I've been married for 43 years, and I've got 2 dogs and 3 cats, and I think that's me in a nutshell.
Nice. Okay, great. Nice introduction. So I guess the first thing I want to touch on is you used to be an engineer, and then you became basically specifically, and I do want to go into this actually, an ordained unity and interfaith minister. So I'm not entirely sure, that's quite a title, and I'm not entirely sure what it entails. But just before we kind of go into exactly what that is, how did that transition go for you, going from being an engineer and kind of like going down this spiritual path? Like, was there something particular that happened in your life, or were you always kind of on some kind of a seeking journey? I'm interested to know how that went for you.
Yeah, it is kind of a interesting shift. And I think it's always interesting when people really shift their careers. And I find many people who are on the spiritual path have a massive shift like that. So when I was in engineering, and I worked for a major energy company, and I also was in management, and I always found myself talking to people. I always found people always bringing their problems to me. So that was kind of a general theme. And I was a spiritual seeker from a young age, and in my 20s and 30s. I finally left that career, and I found a Unity church which really matched my own theology, which was questioning traditional Christianity at the time, but also wanting something that was transcended the regular old physical experience that we have. So I found the Unity church, and Unity is really different. I mean, we're based on Christian theology, but we interpret the Bible metaphysically. We're really about the divine being within. It's a combination of Eastern and Western theologies, and the inner Christ being manifest within each of us. And I found that, and then I started just kind of studying and deepening my spiritual self there. And I ended up just, going through classes and the educational process there. And I took a job doing an interim minister job at a church. And I just found that everything just kind of expanded around me. It was just very, very supportive. The university was supporting me. The universe was supporting me. And I just felt like, okay, I'm going to go forward and start my own church. And so I ended up doing that. So I have an interfaith ordination from One Spirit Interfaith Seminary in New York. And I have an ordination from Unity, which used to be called Unity School of Christianity. Now it's Unity Worldwide Ministries. And those are my two ordinations. Now, I do have a bridge career. I was a barista for a couple of years.
Okay.
And I mention this because I think barista is the best combination of chemical engineering and ministry. Because coffee is all about pressure and temperature. And people came to this little coffee shop just like it was like a Cheers bar, if you're old enough to remember that series Cheers, where people would come and they'd tell me their problems and we'd talk, and it was kind of like that. So that was my bridge career.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. So you did that after being an engineer and between being a minister. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Okay. So let's start getting into some of the stuff that you kind of teach and some of your like spiritual, I guess that your spiritual practices personally, because this idea of the inner Christ and Christ consciousness, I've actually had some conversations recently where people who are more kind of traditional Christian, like very kind of by the book and a bit more, I guess you would call it orthodox, they're quite against these concepts, I've noticed. Like sometimes they seem to get a little bit triggered about ideas of kind of the inner Christ and Christ consciousness, almost as if that idea is something, that's something not to be discussed or or that that's a misinterpretation. First of all, have you noticed that there is sometimes a little bit of a backlash to these ideas of like inner Christ and Christ consciousness? And then second of all, I guess, why did you come to those kind of avenues of thinking about kind of religion and spirituality as opposed to more orthodox avenues?
Yeah, well, yes, I do experience a lot of backlash. I think that really when I look at my life, I don't belong in any group. Every group wants to toss me out. So here's the thing. I would say that from my viewpoint, I think that traditional Christianity offers a lot, but the idea of a vicarious sacrifice, that there is that somebody would die for me and that I would be absolved of all of my karma, anything that I've done, that just doesn't make any sense in the context of what I understand about universal truth. So that was always kind of a problem for me. Original sin was always kind of a problem for me, that we're all sinners and we just have to kind of live with that and have our sins be cleansed by another being. So I really feel like what my theology that I've adopted through Unity, it's really more about being very responsible, but it's not made up. I mean, I really believe when you look at the Gospels that Jesus, for me, was the person who manifested the Christ essence so fully that everyone could see, oh, this is God. And came here to show us, to teach us that that is our truth, that we too can do this. So it's not like Jesus is on some sort of pedestal that's so beyond our reach, but that is actually the full manifestation of what is possible for us. And so to me, that is the truth that he was here teaching. And I think that it scares a lot of people because they don't want to claim that light within them. It's easier to project that onto another being and say, oh, look at me, poor little sinner me. Thank God there's this amazing thing up there beyond me. It's so much more of a challenging path to take that responsibility and say, this is my path, to actually do and be what I can on this planet and however many lifetimes I have here, to fully manifest the Christ essence myself, and that God, the transcendent energy that is under all that is in us, that we are created out of it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that makes a lot more sense to me. And I think it puts the onus on us to spiritually evolve and become the best people we can be.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you. And, you know, one of the reasons why I think that I'm drawn more to that kind of interpretation is I personally think that this idea, which really is probably could even be one of the most central ideas, if not the most central in all of traditional Christianity, is this idea that you're born with original sin, which you need to be kind of absolved of. And I find this just quite I don't know, maybe my interpretation is taking it a little too kind of literally, or maybe I need to, I guess, just kind of like relax a little bit on that topic. But for me, the way that I kind of look at that idea, it seems to me very similar to some ideas that we have now, where it's like, you know, you've got this stuff in wokeism, which we all accept as, you know, well, we don't all accept, of course, but I probably yourself and I would accept it, that these ideas of, you know, if you're born male, then, you know, you are born into this patriarchy and you have to apologize for it. Or if you are born, you know, white, then you are somehow inherently, you know, there's these injustices that happened in the past and therefore you need to kind of repent for being white, or whatever it is. If you're straight, that's another one. You know, there's all of these kind of original sins. And I think that a lot of people who are kind of more on that, I guess, center right on the spectrum, or who, you know, just generally are a bit more against this wokeism stuff, they can recognize that that concept is kind of corrosive. Whereas you have a religion which has that concept very central to it. And I'm not sure, by the way, whether necessarily it was supposed to be interpreted this way. So I'm interested to get your thoughts on that. But it seems to me that you've got this kind of corrosive concept that we're all born sinners and therefore you need to repent for it, which seems to kind of just like devalue the nature of being human in some sense, to being like, okay, well, we just need to get on our knees and apologize for what we are. And it's like, well, what did I do? Did I do something wrong? I mean, if I did something wrong, I want to recognize it here in the now. I want to recognize if I make a mistake towards my family or my friends, or I lied to someone, or I hurt someone, or whatever that is. Of course, those things should be recognized. But I kind of feel like spending your time sitting around apologizing for something which you have no real concept of seems strange to me. This idea that you're born a sinner, is a child who's born, one of the most innocent things that you can see born, are they born a sinner? That concept seems kind of corrosive to me. So interested to get your thoughts on that. And then also the second idea is just this idea that, well, we have to just worship God in a sense, but we can never try to ascribe to be Christ-like or anything like that. We can never try to aim towards that because it's impossible. You'll never be on that level. So you just have to worship. And it seems kind of like a dead end to me. Okay, it's good to be thankful, it's good to be grateful, etc., for what you have and for where you've come from whoever the creator is. But the idea that you can't kind of aim towards having those values yourself, again, seems to me to kind of just be like, it kind of puts a glass ceiling on the human experience in a way. And so I'm just interested to get your thoughts. I know that was a bit of a ramble, but just to get your thoughts generally on those ideas.
Yeah, no, all of it for sure. Well, I think we create religions out of convenience. And I don't want to take I don't want to be critical of anyone's religion, because I do believe that faith traditions can really support people. And I think we're all at different levels of consciousness on this planet. And so we're going to be attracted to different messages. And we're not going to understand messages that are at different levels of consciousness, especially higher levels of consciousness than we may be at ourselves. And so we tend to criticize those things that look very foreign to us. So I do think that being an original sinner, to me, it just doesn't resonate. I see a baby come in, and it's the closest thing to the divine that exists. I mean, it just came from, to me, it just came from the oneness. It came from the ethers. I don't even attempt to want to be able to describe what that actually is, but she or he comes onto this planet innocent. Then we, the human condition, alter its innocence and with our enculturization, with our indoctrination, and then they're succumbing to the enculturation and the indoctrination. And then that looks a little off from the divine, but it's not their fault. We've all been enculturated and indoctrinated. To me, sin is just missing the mark. It is turning away from the divine. It is a choice to not accept our divine nature and to live in a more a darker, lesser world. And so we can choose to move towards our divine nature, or we can choose to move away. When we move away, we tend to act less compassionately, less kind. We tend to do those, steal and lie and all that kind of stuff. When we move towards it, we don't do those things. So to me, it's a choice. We have a choice whether we want to turn away from the divine or turn towards the divine. So to me, that's what sin is. It's our choice, not something that we are born with. Now, we do have ancestral baggage, I guess we would say, whatever our family indoctrinated us in, and then we become kind of that. But we are such powerful beings. I believe that we are endowed with amazing powers. And when I say that, I mean like wisdom and love and the ability to create and those kinds of things. We can imagine, that's an amazing power. We can choose. And when we use these powers to fully manifest ourselves as the highest being we can possibly be. So to me, the whole thing about sin, it just keeps us low. It keeps us in excuse mode. I don't have to really become the best I can be. I don't have to step into a higher consciousness, more of my divinity, and I can just project what is within me to something outside of me. So I think this projection, it's also kind of the shadow. There's the dark shadow and there's the golden shadow. And the golden shadow, we don't want to accept that any more than we want to accept our dark shadow. We don't want to accept our own divine nature. So if we were born out of something that we call God or the great mystery or divine intelligence or whatever term people want to use, I know a lot of people don't like the term God, source energy, whatever it is. If we were born out of that, surely wouldn't we have the same attributes? Wouldn't we have the same kinds of abilities? And I'm not here to say that we are God and that we can supersede God, the great mystery, that there's something way beyond who we are, but that we are equipped with the skills and the powers having come from that primal divine origin. So I probably gave 500 sermons, maybe 600 sermons. I don't think ever once I would have said, you're sinners. Never once. We do make mistakes. We do make errors, and we can always come back to our center, to who we were created to be. And, why would there be a divine energy that just creates mistakes, complete goofs, complete messes, that the only way that they can even come into my presence is if they grovel and worship. It makes no sense to me. I think God wants to be close to us, wants to participate with us, and that we have an active relationship with God, source energy, mystery, whatever word people want to use for it.
Okay, nice. So that does lead me quite nicely onto my next question, but this is a big one, so prepare yourself.
Okay.
What is God?
Yeah, it is a big one. Because it is a paragraph. And I normally say that God is the energy under all that is, both visible and invisible. And that God is both immanent, that we can experience the energy under all of creation within us, and also transcendent, beyond anything that we can imagine. But also when I look at any life, I'm looking outside my window, I'm seeing trees and the wind blowing the leaves, and I'm seeing little bugs and birds, and all of the energy that creates life and sustains life. To me, that is God. To me, the power of love is God. So like when I do weddings for people, some people aren't religious people, and they don't want me to use the term God in the ceremony. And so I tell them I'm fine not using the word God. I don't think God could not care less if I use the term God. But I say I'm uniting you in love, right? Yes, you're not uniting us in love. So love is here, right? Yes, love is here. Well, God's here. God is here. If love is here, God is here. So to me, God is not a being up in the sky, not, that traditional man in the clouds that I was just in a conversation yesterday. It was kind of a disastrous conversation with atheists on Facebook. I just need to resist the temptation. But there's just this denial, understandably, of this man in the sky who is making things happen. And that makes perfect sense to me that is not what God is. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Something energizes everything that is. Something is underneath our breath, our bodies, our consciousness. And to me, that's what God is.
Yeah. I think I think atheism is an absurd position, honestly. It doesn't make any sense to me, because I think it's just all semantics. I don't think you can ever truly be an atheist. I think you're right. Like the people who say they're atheists, I think they're just rejecting some kind of a very like visceral image of, like bearded man in the sky type thing. But when you really press them on like, well, how did we get here? And it's like, no matter what you say to that, no matter how far back you go, people will try to appeal to science and say, oh, well, the Big Bang and, 4 billion years ago or whatever it is. And all of this stuff. And then you go, yeah, but what brought everything into existence? What brought the matter? Even if matter was all, condensed into this tiny little whatever thing the size of an atom that exploded out and made everything. Even if that's true, what is that thing? What came before that thing? Like, there are questions which are completely incomprehensible to us. And some people say, well, I call that ineffable thing that I can't really speak of because it's beyond words, because it's beyond our ability to kind of have a lexicon about it. And, there's people who say that. And then there's people who say, oh, well, I'm just going to say if there's anything that's outside of like that language can't really address it, I'll just say that, well, you can never prove it. But I mean, there's loads of things that you can never really prove, right? I mean, if I love someone, I can't prove necessarily, like I can't prove that I'm having that like emotion, like, things like that are, or if I say something is beautiful, I'm experiencing beauty, I can never really prove it, but it inherently exists,
Right. I mean, you can't prove the color yellow. There are so many things you can't prove. I may be seeing something different than you. And love is a good one because I remember having this conversation with one of my daughter's boyfriends, not boyfriend anymore, but he was atheist. And I was like, I used the love metaphor, what is love, and well, he couldn't answer it. So that was kind of a problem in terms of him being my daughter's boyfriend. But you can't prove love. You can't see love. You can see the impacts of love. You can see the result of love. You can kind of feel it in you. But the same is true for me of the transcendent God. I can feel the divine pulse. And if you can't feel that, I feel a little sad. But how can you look at a flower even, or a bee, an ant, a deer, anything? How can you look at that and not go, wow, there is something so amazing about that. And the patterns are so beautiful. And there's something under that made that. And I don't think it was like there's a man in the sky that said, there shall be deer, there shall be bee. Not that. I don't have answers to how we all got here. But there's something that you keep going down and down, and you get to these little quantum levels, and it becomes all energy down there. So to me, maybe that energy, or that whatever is underneath that energy, is what God is. But it's something so beyond what we can know. You can't describe it, but you can experience it. You can love. You can reflect beauty. You can create. And I think every time we're in those kinds of modes, we are, quote, serving God. We are expressing our God nature.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So how do we connect with God? You just mentioned those things there about like seeing a flower and seeing a bee and all these things, and kind of being wowed by that, like feeling feeling the energy behind it, and feeling the kind of the divine in these things that we see. But how do we do that? Because I know that I have trouble. Like, sometimes I can get there, and I feel like I get there very, very easily with psychedelics. Psychedelics is something that I found has given me that connection. Whether some people will say, oh, well, that's an inauthentic or whatever experience. Personally, for me, it's opened me up to these concepts. I don't think I was even open to the concept of God before psychedelics. So that's something that I find like I can have that connection. I mean, I can have it at other times generally, but I guess it's definitely much more of a shortcut for me to get there. But how do we do that in our day-to-day life? How do we do that through our, is it through thoughts and prayers? And how do you feel like we can connect most readily with God?
I mean, I think the fastest answer is through presence. And I think that most of us just aren't present. Our minds are in the past. Our minds are in the future. Our minds are thinking. Our minds are active. We're in this kind of beta mode of thinking. And as long as we're there, there's not the opening. There's not the opening for just a little bit of space. We need to create a little bit of space in between thoughts. And that gives an opening. And so I think that, meditation does that. If you want to sit in the quiet and allow just a little bit of space between thoughts, that little space is where the divine is. It's like the divine is always there. God is always there. But that little space is where we can apprehend it, where we can experience it. And I think one of the things we can do is be grateful. We lift our energy up, our consciousness, our vibration up when we're in gratitude, and when we are in awe, when we are in reverence. So if we're going to be looking at flowers and trees and nature and whatnot, I can just be in my car and it all passes by, and that's the way I am probably 90%, 99% of my life. I don't know. I haven't counted, but we can stop and be deliberate. Just as I spoke of before, we can make a choice. We have the power to make a choice in this moment. I am going to be awake. I'm going to be aware. I'm going to open my consciousness and be present. I'm going to be present with this flower or this bee or whatever it is, or in awe or in reverence. And I think those are those moments where it's like time can completely expand. Time can completely go away. That when you're fully present with someone, and you can be present with a person too. I think most people who've like fallen in love or experienced a relationship like that, it feels so magical because we're so present. And I think that's where we really are able to fully experience the divine. I know some people experience the divine going to churches, going to sacred places, going to the Red Rocks or whatever in Arizona. I think it's available to us anywhere at any time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And do you think that kind of following those emotions and that kind of, when you're experiencing that divine, that is, I guess, to give my take on this before I pose the question, I think that everyone there is a kind of a God's plan for everyone. There is some kind of a path, and it might not be exact actions, but there's some kind of path for everyone, which is like more divine. And then there's paths which are less divine, and there's paths which are, lead you more towards kind of like evil. And I do want to ask you about evil as well in a minute, but would you agree that like sensing those kind of sensing that divinity and then following it kind of leads you more towards that the correct path, like the path that you were kind of destined to follow in a way? Or do you not think that there's such a thing as kind of destiny or like some individual path? Do you think that those concepts exist or not? And how do you kind of relate that to God's plan?
Yeah, okay. There's a lot to say about that. First of all, I think that the more that we cultivate our relationship with the divine, our ability to be present, and the more we cultivate that through awe, reverence, gratitude, meditation, the more likely that we are able to really listen to our guidance. So we all also have a gift of discernment. We have a gift of wisdom. We have a gift of will. And these are gifts that allow us to see what is possible and make choices, and to discern what is really underneath something. And is this should I go left and should I go right? And what we normally do when we're kind of at a juncture like that, go left or right, is we Google. We ask somebody, we do something outside of ourselves. What do you think I should go? Should I go left or right? I'm going to take a poll. We get outside of ourselves because we don't trust our inner voice. We don't trust our inner voice because we haven't been listening to it. And to me, the inner voice is the inner divine self, the higher self, that will guide us to take left or right. All right, so that's one thing I believe. Another thing I fully believe, because I had this experience. I had this experience once. It was, oh gosh, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago in Florida, where I lived there. And I was in the process of becoming licensed as a teacher within Unity, and I had an hour and a half drive to go teach this class, and I had so many things go wrong, okay? I got a projector, my projector wasn't right, I had to get another one, technical error after technical error, and then I'm halfway there, and I realize I forgot something, and should I go back? I'm not going to go into all the details, but it felt like I was at this kind of moment in my life. Is God telling me that I shouldn't do this? Because there were so many obstacles that were put in front of me. Am I getting a divine voice saying, don't pursue this path? And I thought about that. And I realized that what my path was going to be going forward was 100% my choice. I chose to go forward, even though I had felt like I had 100 trees block my drive there, and I'm speaking metaphorically. I chose to go forward, and that then ended up being my path, my destiny. I made it. So I think there's guidance. I think there may be signs along the way if you should go left or right. But ultimately, when I choose to go right instead of left, that's my destiny. I just created it.
Yeah. I also sometimes think, in a situation like that, for example, maybe these tests are put in front of you to really test your will about something.
Exactly. Your fortitude.
Yeah. It's like sometimes if you really want something, you do just find like, I really want this thing, but everything is going wrong for me. How much do I want it? It kind of really makes you ask that question. And because sometimes that's a question you need to answer. Sometimes it's like, do I really want this? Do I want it enough to overcome all of these obstacles? And like, if I do, then at least I found that out now. And if I don't, again, at least I can stop wasting my time on a goal that I'm not really committed to because I'm not willing to kind of go through the hurdles.
Yeah, so we really do discern, we decide that for ourselves. And I think every athlete, every musician would be able to definitely support this idea. They go through all of this practice to finally become the skilled athlete or musician that they are, and there's obstacles all over the place. So yeah, I think sometimes obstacles may be thrown in your way, but who's throwing them? If I don't think there's an external God out there throwing lightning bolts down, then who's throwing them? Maybe I'm creating these obstacles so that I can actually decide how committed I am and then go forward or not, like you say.
Yeah. Okay. So just to, I guess, spin that around and look at the opposite side of it, which is that there's some kind of a evil energy, some kind of a devil figure that's puts these things in your way to stop you from achieving your divine path and all these kind of things. Let's talk about evil for a few minutes, because I'm interested to know kind of your take on evil, like whether, does evil exist? And if it does, who or what is manifesting it?
Yeah, these are really interesting questions. I would say that unity would not really say that there is an evil power out there. I have to say, and watching what's been going on the past few years, I've been like, looks a little evil to me. I would say that evil does exist. I don't think it has inherent power. I think darkness exists. I don't think it cannot, darkness cannot overcome light. Okay, light can come into a dark room and lighten it. And so I think evil exists in that it is the complete denial of the light, complete denial of God, the great mystery, the source energy, who we really are. And so it's really blocking out all of the light, and what is left is darkness. So in itself, it doesn't really have power. It only has power because we give it power. And it only has so it's power that people give it. If we turn away from all of it, it would have no existence in itself. It's in contrast to the light. So I do not denounce the evil. I'm not saying that evil doesn't exist. I'm not saying some people don't embody evil. I've seen enough of that to say there's, psychopaths, for example. I mean, they're completely blocked off from the light. Now, is there such a being that doesn't have any light in it? I don't know that. I'm probably very hopeful that everybody has light in them. Everybody has a spark of the divine in them. Some people are just completely cut off, and the rest of us are cut off at varying degrees. And then there's the ultimate light beings that aren't probably cut off at all.
It's interesting the way that you talk about that, because you talk about being cut off from the light, that being seemingly the defining factor of what would be, I guess evil might not be the right term, but, the non-existence of the divine or the absence of the divine is kind of being cut off from the light. And it's almost like, shadows. That's how shadows operate, right? Darkness really in the world it's not, nothing is truly dark. It's just has an absence of light, right? Like there is things which are illuminated and there are things that are in the shadow. And this kind of brings me to something that I think about a lot. There is this kind of like dualism in the world where there seems to be these kind of polarized concepts, and one of them seems to represent some alignment with the divine, and one of them, and the opposite, seems to represent the absence of the divine. The ideas like light and dark, and truth and lies, and love and fear, and these kind of things. There seems to be these kind of like dual concepts that always exist, and that's why this is actually something that brings me towards concepts of Christianity, because I do think that good and evil, God and devil, whether or not you view God and the devil as literal beings, right, of some sense, or whether you view those as kind of concepts which are just articulating something about nature, something about the way the world works, that there are these two polarizing concepts, and one of them is righteous and one of them is kind of more darkness. That seems to exist. And I really struggle talking about this because I don't know where my thoughts are really going, other than just I feel there's something there. I'm wondering whether you've thought about them any more, these kind of concepts, these polarizing ideas that seem to exist within the world, and just your thoughts on them generally. Like maybe try and pad out what I'm not articulating here.
Yeah, well, I think that any answer to that would be just a model. I don't think any of us know the answer to that. Many people think that the earth is a plane where souls have come on to the planet to grow in consciousness. And ultimately we are returning to the light. Like ultimately we're fallen angels almost, or fallen beings. We came from God and we've fallen into this, precipitated out into this physicality, and that we are on our path back to union, and that the earth plane is this place where we can learn and where we can grow ourselves. I mean, that's certainly one model that would say, that kind of makes sense. In that model, sometimes souls play the bad guy and sometimes souls play the good guy. I don't know if that's true. I don't know what's true. I only can go, my mind can go nuts creating models and answers. I know exactly what you're saying. This is a place of dualities, of polarities. Now, I really think that if we hold polarities, if we hold any polarity that long enough, that something transcends that and grows out of that is bigger and more amazing. So maybe we are here to really experience these polarities and hold the tension of the polarity. Hold the tension of love and hate, or, whatever, good and evil, and be with it enough. Maybe if we do that something transcends and something creative comes out of that. I don't know. All I know is, for me personally, I know that's the one thing I have power over. It's the only thing I have power over, is myself. And so for me, it makes perfect sense to me that I want to completely express the highest expression of myself as possible. And so whatever comes my way, good or evil, what good can I make out of this? And I know I have that power. I have that power because I'm in control of my own self. I'm not in control of the whole universe. I'm not controlling the matrix paradigm that we're in. I don't know what it all is. It's becoming more and more clear to me that we are in some sort of a controlled matrix, but I just know that what I can do. So you're right. We are living in a world of polarities, or we're living in a very strange world. And what can we do with it? We can philosophize about it forever, or we can just work with them and evolve ourselves.
You just said something there which has really piqued my interest, and I want to just address it before I move on to my next question. The controlled matrix. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, I think probably like a lot of your listeners, I've had a major awakening in the last few years, and it started earlier. But boy, I think these COVID years just really popped me out of the matrix, and you start seeing. I'm not out. I'm not going to say that, but just I've seen certain layers now that it does look like we're kind of in some kind of a contrived reality. I'm not here to say it's a simulation or anything like that. I just don't really know. But it does seem a lot like the Matrix movies. It does seem a lot like we have been indoctrinated into a system, and that we are kind of slaves of this system, and that we've been indoctrinated into being docile beings. That's becoming more and more clear to me.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would totally agree with you. I mean, the stuff that we've seen over the past few years, it's just kind of blown my mind. And especially just the amount of people who have not only fallen for it, but have kind of become foot soldiers for this really, really dark agenda. It makes me, I know that we use the term I know that people use the term NPC kind of disparagingly, but sometimes I see behavior from people, especially, what we've seen during these years. And I'm like, I'm not even sure whether it's just NPC. It's more like agents. Literally, I mean, you use the word matrix. It's like the agents in the matrix who are just programmed to just, fall in line with this really, really dark agenda. And, I want to have, I guess, not sympathy, but maybe compassion is the right word. Like, I want to have compassion for people and always think, okay, anyone can kind of be saved. But I don't know, like, maybe not. Like, I'm just not sure, because it does seem like there was this big test. There was this big thing that happened in the world, and it was like an opportunity to separate the people out who are really thinking about these things, who are really kind of connected and have some sense of good and evil. And I'm not saying that, the people who just went along with it and genuinely were like, I want to save Granny or whatever, and just fell for the propaganda. Of course, like, I have sympathy for those people. But the people who really kind of like attacked those people who were standing up, who really attacked the people who didn't want to get the vaccine, who didn't want to wear the mask, whatever, and they went out there and made it their mission. No, I'm gonna be a kind of a foot soldier for the state or whatever. Yeah, it seems kind of distinctly evil to me, and it's almost like it's separated society out into these two groups that I'm not sure can be reconciled.
Yeah, to me, it was like my life was a deck of cards, and it was just thrown in the air, and the cards are still floating down and trying to find a new form. That's how my perception of reality looked to me during those years. I was just absolutely in shock at seeing the behavior of, quote, good people, and that split in timeline realities, that there are two different kinds of people looking at the same reality and having different responses, is just very, very shocking. And so it's really been great this last couple of years there, where it's all kind of settling, and now I can look back. And yeah, I think it's very scary. I think that what I saw was, I understood how the Third Reich happened. I understood how the Maoist revolution happened. Those things were they seemed historical to me. They seemed like they were things that happened to other people in other places. And now it just was brought home. Like that can happen so quickly here. Mm-hmm. And myself, I saw people who had good, empathetic intentions, that those were hijacked. Like you talk about, some of those people were just trying to do good for Granny. And I also saw a lot of viciousness. And I saw it from spiritual people. I saw it from ministers. I saw it from doctors. I saw it from people that I didn't expect. And so it has completely shifted how I look at the world and kind of who I am and what feels safe. Now, ultimately, I don't really believe that death ends us. I ultimately believe that we transcend this reality and that our consciousness is beyond our bodies. So I don't have these fears like this is the only incarnation that I have, and therefore I've got to really hold on to it and be safe and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, we are living here, and it does seem now that we are living among people whose fears or whatever has gotten the best of them. And in a moment, the propaganda could be turned right back on and the behavior could get very scary.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, what I was saying before about those kind of polar concepts, and one of them that I mentioned was love and fear. And I think the people who have kind of chosen to live by fear rather than live by love, they were the people who were all, ready to, dob their neighbor into the authorities for not taking a vaccine or not wearing a mask or whatever, or not social distancing. And they would have been, I think they would have felt nothing to watch their neighbors get marched away into a, facility. You know what I mean? I mean,
or felt glee.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I've said this a bunch of times on the podcast before. Like, before COVID, I didn't understand. I just couldn't wrap my head around. I used to watch a lot of kind of World War II documentaries and things like that, especially. And, I couldn't wrap my head around the idea that people would do this to their neighbors, the idea that people would put others in camps and all the rest of it. It just didn't make any sense to me. And then when COVID happened, that question was answered. Like, I don't think it could be answered for me outside of feeling it and outside of witnessing it myself. No matter how many documentaries I watched, I was like, did they really believe, did they really fall for that? Did they really fall for, the little beer mats and things that showed that the Jews look like this or whatever? Like, did that really work on people, like dehumanizing and stuff? But then when it happens in real life and you see, they are dehumanizing, they are saying you're a super spreader, they are showing, commercial, like we had commercials in the UK where people were walking around, it was showing like green gases coming out of their mouths and it was infecting their families and stuff. And I just thought, okay, I get it now. And the thing is, these people, just kind of bring this more back to like that spiritual point, these people who are living by fear, they are dangerous. That's how evil manifests, I think. And that's why I think, as you said, you've had a lot of people in the spiritual community and stuff like that you've seen who have gone down this path. I think that a lot of fakers have been brought to the surface. It's kind of like, I never considered myself to be like a really deep spiritual person or whatever. And I thought, okay, well, I'll leave it to the people who are in that world. Like, of course, they're gonna stand up and say something. And then seeing them not say anything and seeing all these other people who, were writing books and, on TV and who were these kind of like alternative personalities, seeing a lot of them just kind of go along with it. And then it kind of made me realize, like, you have to become your own hero in this story. Like, everyone had to become their own hero because we were kind of abandoned by the people who we were expected to stand up and take the righteous stance, to really kind of say, no, I'm not going to like fall for the fear and the propaganda. I'm going to like be in service of truth. And you realize there's not that many people actually who are in service of truth. Like, there's a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say about that. For one, whatever COVID was, and I still don't know what it actually was. I'm not sure anybody really does, but it shed the light on everything. I mean, it did serve to put light on everyone. So people who were the good people, I am such a good person, I love everybody, and you saw them turn into almost evil incarnate. You saw what was true there. You saw who they were. And then there are other people who you had the opposite expectation of, but they kind of stood up. So what's so great about that is that we had moments of truth where we could see everybody. We could see everybody where they stand, and that's it. It's shocking, but that's it. That's what it is. Yeah. The whole fear thing is so interesting. And what were people afraid of? What were people afraid of? Getting sick and dying? Is that the worst thing that's going to happen to us? I mean, we're all going to die. So that whole fear thing was just so magnified. If you actually knew who you were as a spiritual being, as a human of divine light, you would not be fearing death no matter how it shows up. Now, I know that's an ideal. Most people still fear death. But what that was a complete manifestation that showed us where people's belief is, where people's belief were in their own selves, who they were, who we are. So we obviously just believe that we're physical bodies. We obviously just believe that. Most of us just believe that. And that has to be conserved as much as possible. It has to be saved. It has to be safe. Why are we so afraid? And I think it just showed us how much we fear death. And what I think we're being called to do right now is really reinvigorate, resurrect, give life to our divinity, like who we really are, and move away from the material, limited idea that we are just our body. So that's another thought that kind of comes up with the fear part. And just it was also just shocking to see how easy it was to just drum up fear, and just the repetitive reports on COVID cases and blah, 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 blah. But I think what has happened with people is they cannot make the connection. They can't make the comparison that this is even close to Maoist revolution or Nazi Germany. They'll always say, well, it's not about race. It's not about the Jews. That there really was a virus. It really was going to harm people. We're just trying to help people. And that was the cleverness of it, That's the cleverness of it. So those who abided by trying to turn their neighbor in really think they're doing the right thing. Oh, they wouldn't do it to a Jew. They wouldn't do it to a black person. They wouldn't do it to a whatever kind of person. But they're going to do it to anybody who's just so irresponsible that they're spreading germs. Mm-hmm. And the last thing I want to say is, during this time, I had to question the design of contagion. I don't need to get into all of that. I'm sure you've had other guests. But really, is everything on this earth so vulnerable to people's breath? We've survived millions of years of evolution, and here we are, and we have been designed in a way that you should be afraid of my breath. Because to me, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound right at all about design, that I'm only safe if I am away from you. I don't think so. If God is love, then we need to be close to each other. We need to be able to love each other. We need to be in proximity to each other. So it seemed very antithetical to anything that I would consider a divine design.
Yeah. I mean, obviously there's things which you would say, okay, that is a genuinely, dangerous disease. I mean, I do question actually like transmission generally now. I'm not 100% convinced that transmission as a concept has really been proven. And that's from having conversations with people like Alex Zeck, who, really speak about the fact that there is a lack of scientific evidence for it. But I'm not ruling it out completely. I wouldn't say okay, I'm absolutely, I'm not kind of nailing myself to that post. However, I do think that there is some things which I say, okay, cool. Let's not try and transmit that thing. Let's be careful. If you're genuinely sick or whatever, and you want to stay away from people, perfectly fine. That's your decision. It's a decision of the people around you. The problem is when people go and say, well, you're responsible for everyone else. And even if you're not sick, you've got to assume you're sick. You've got to assume that you're diseased and you're going around doing this stuff. That kind of gets into a very pathological, view of the world, where everyone, it's almost like guilty until proven innocent, but it's sick until proven healthy kind of thing. These concepts are kind of backwards. It's you should assume that people are healthy, and you should assume that you can be close to people, etc., until they actually have something, until they actually have a disease or a sickness, and then you say, okay, now if I want to take aversive action, that's totally reasonable. But we lost our minds during that time. What can I say? But I agree with you. There has been this illumination process. It's kind of like the tide has receded, and we've seen where everyone's standing. I can't remember the phrase that when the tide goes in, you see who's wearing pants or something. You know what I mean? Like that's what's happening. You know, you've kind of seen people from who they are. And yeah, I do think that it comes a lot into spirituality. You know, how much are you afraid of death? How much are you afraid of other people? How much are you acting out of fear rather than love, etc.? Like all of these things kind of came into that time. I don't know if you can hear this bell going. I apologize. There's a lot of noise going on outside. I'm gonna just move on to something else, which is another kind of deep question. What is suffering and why do we suffer? How do you answer this question?
Oh, I do think that suffering is a choice. I don't think pain is. I think that we can actually feel pain, and that's just pain. But the suffering is the dwelling in the space of pain and kind of keeping that pain body in action and energizing it and constantly suffering because we're being victimized. What was your question? What is suffering and what?
Yeah, and why do we suffer? Like, you know, from your perspective, what's the reason behind it?
I can't answer that question. I don't like it. I'd never answer that question, but I will say a lot of people would say we suffer to grow. All right? Mm-hmm. We suffer to grow. I don't know if that is satisfactory to me. I don't think that we were designed to suffer. I don't think we were put onto, I don't think that there's some divine idea that if you just suffer a whole lot, you're going to really, benefit from this. I think I can suffer and grow, but when I think of things like child trafficking and when I think of things like, sex slaves and horrible things like that, I've talked to people on my podcast. It's unbelievable the suffering they've had to go through and the healing they've had to go through from even being a baby or a small child. And it's really hard for me to go, oh my gosh, that was God's plan for them. I do think that suffering can be used for good. I do think that you can heal from anything. And I think that the healing process is something that is so impactful on individual consciousness and also the collective consciousness. I think when anybody heals from some horrific incident or horrific trauma, that it raises the ceiling of consciousness for all of us. It impacts all of us. So I do think that suffering can be used for good when you heal, but it's really hard for me to say that there is intention in suffering or that we're supposed to suffer for any reason. I tend to think that we are here to really experience joy and creativity and love, and that's what we're here to do. But those of us who have turned away from the light and who are choosing to live in the darkness have created these polarities or created these situations where people suffer. And then what good can be made from that, and that is healing. So I'm not sure I answered your question. I don't think suffering is intentional just so you can heal and just so you can raise consciousness and just so you can get better. I don't think that we are put here to suffer. I do think that suffering happens because there is some sort of fall in our consciousness. And I do think that good can come from suffering through healing.
Okay, interesting. I want to know your thoughts on kind of what I think about suffering, because I've been thinking about this quite a bit lately. And I guess it all comes back to my ideas that there's these kind of polarities. And, one of them is that we can have like pure suffering and pure ecstasy as kind of, one is, I would say, like objectively more desirable than the other, which would be the pure ecstasy experience. But in order to have some kind of a pure ecstatic experience, whether that's, like pure love or pure peace or, whatever manifestation that has, but some kind of a extremely positive experience, you can't really have that without suffering existing, because you can't have one experience without knowing the other. It's like if you were only living in the bliss wouldn't be bliss, because you don't have the other side of that coin. You don't have the thing that's non-bliss, i.e. suffering. You don't have that to compare it to. So therefore, you can only know bliss. You can only have this range if suffering is there. And it's similar with kind of shades of light and everything. You can't know like pure darkness without pure light. And there's all of this spectrum that exists in between these two states, and that creates the kind of tapestry of life, which is what we enjoy. We enjoy moving through these parts of the spectrum between these two extremes, and one of them will be, suffering and bliss just as much as any of these other spectrums. They must both necessarily exist in order to have that kind of variation in life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great model. I've said that too myself. I mean, I think it's a model. We don't know, all right, but that's a great model to explain why there are those two extremes. I wonder though if this isn't a polarity, like suffering and bliss. Like it's not really about spending your whole life in suffering or only wanting to achieve bliss. But when you hold those two polarities and you hold the tension of those, I think what you find is you're in a state of beingness. Like there's something that transcends the polarity, the having to go between bliss and suffering. And that's one way to exist. But if you hold that polarity, perhaps you can find a peaceful place that is just being.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Yeah, for sure. And I also think, music is kind of like a nice metaphor for this, because if you listen to a great song, normally it's not just going to be happy all the way through. Normally it's not just going to be kind of like in the major scales the whole time. It's going to kind of go from major and then it's going to go to minor, and it's going to take on more of a kind of sadness, and then it elevates again. And sometimes it's louder and sometimes it's quieter, etc. Like you want this variation with music. You don't want music to just always be happy and upbeat all the time and jovial, because that would be boring, right? Like you want these various emotions to come through with music. So why wouldn't you want those various emotions to come through in your life as well? And without differences in feeling, without different emotions, including suffering and bliss, but other things as well, like sorrow and happiness, etc., life would just be boring. It would just be plain. So like all these things exist because they must exist for us to have an elevated experience.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we could say that this plane that we're on is really a plane to experience those polarities, experience those the song, that we're here to live the song. And that it would be boring. And maybe we did leave some boring state, maybe there is an ultimate bliss that we came from, but it was boring as hell. So let's go have some fun. That could be what this earth plane is. I don't know. I do think that when we're talking about these kinds of things, we're just creating models or creating structures that help us understand. And then, we might create another one as we grow and say, that structure doesn't really work for me anymore. Maybe it's this. And so that's why I don't really say this is exactly what I know to be true, because I don't know any of that to be true. But what you say does make a lot of sense.
Yeah. I mean, same. I theorize about these things, but I never hold myself too strongly to it. But actually what you were saying there about maybe where we've come from is pure bliss, that is kind of how I see things. I actually think that we probably did come from a place, again, it's just a theory I have that may be completely wrong. I may die and be like, wow, I got that one wrong. But for now, my belief is that we came from, we came from somewhere that was kind of like purely blissful, some kind of like heavenly state, you might say. And then that we come into this life and then we have all these experiences of positive and negative and all the rest of it. And then when we die, we go, oh, wow, like, damn, I know I was suffering. Because, I mean, for everyone who is going into death, you're experiencing some kind of suffering. So the last thing you experience in your life is probably going to be the most suffering you'll ever experience in your life, which is the process of dying. And then, in my view, you probably kind of wake up from that and go, wow, I'm happy to hang out here for a bit. Let's hang out in the pure bliss for a while, because, that was heavy.
That was rough.
Yeah.
But then after a while, it's like, send me back.
Exactly, yeah. And then after a while, like, God, I'm bored of this now. Time for another go. Yeah, like I'll try and remember this time that, when I'm going in, I'm going to return to the bliss. But then you forget, because it would be boring to remember, right? Like there's just a lot of these paradoxes going on. Okay, I want to turn my attention to something else, something which we both share, which is a belief that, humans and animals are both a value, and we should be having more compassion for animals. I know that you are a vegan, right? You are an ethical vegan.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have I know that you've talked about this a little bit on your podcast. Actually, I forgot to mention, this is where I learned about your podcast was from our mutual friends Paul and Lauren Bell. They told me about your pod, and I checked out the episode on there. So that's how I actually found out about you. So Yeah, I just want to kind of get your ideas on how you view animals and our compassion towards animals in this whole thing. I know you have this blog called is it called Wolf and the Lamb? Is that the
Wolf and the Lamb? Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
based on a scripture. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's based on
Yeah.
scripture, but is this also to do? I got the impression that this was to do with animals, right? Our relationship with animals.
It is, yeah. It's based on a scripture in Isaiah that says, there will be time when the wolf lies with the lamb, and so the predator and the predator and the prey are lying together, and that we come back to like an Edenic experience. And in Genesis 1:29, it says Genesis 1:29 was a vegan world. Okay, Genesis, the creation of the story about the creation of the earth and humanity. I believe it's metaphorical. There may be some history to it. I don't know. Whatever you believe about it, it's a really, really interesting story, if nothing else. And it was a vegan world. I mean, it says very, very clearly that God gave humankind, well, first of all, God created everything and the animals and was happy. It was all good, 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 good. And then God created humanity and it was good. And that what we are to eat are plants. Everyone was to eat plants. It says it in the Bible. So everybody who's a Bible person needs to go back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 29 and look at it, because that is the intention of the divine according to that story. Now, you may not, want to believe anything about the Bible, but according to that story. And Isaiah, there's a quote that talks about how we will come to a time where the prey and the predator come back together, and that we are led, by a small child. So that's why it's called Wolf and the Lamb. And so my little logo on that blog spot is a wolf lying down with the lamb, and the lamb is not being consumed by the wolf. Mm-hmm. So I have a lot to say about this, especially to the freedom community, because I think this is such a huge blind spot in the freedom community, just massive, massive. They're very concerned about the World Economic Forum or whoever, the powers that shouldn't be, taking away their meat, and that this is a right I have, and I ought to be able to choose whatever I want to eat and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of get that. It's very, very individualistic, very, very libertarian. I can make my own choices. But we don't make our own choices when it comes to harming another. There's one fundamental law. We don't harm others. We can make our own choices as long as we're not harming anyone. And so the question is, who is anyone, and why do we stop at the interface between humans and animals? How can we ever expect freedom? How can we ever not want to be herded by society? How can we ever not want to be force inoculated? How can we ever, not want to be controlled by some powers that be if we're enslaving others? I mean, spiritually, how does that work? How does the slave owner in 1850, the South of the United States, Alabama, take any state, South Carolina, who has slaves, how does he expect really for freedom to happen on this planet when he's enslaving another? It just doesn't work. What we put out comes back to us. What goes around comes around. It's karma. It's the law of reciprocity. It's the law of compensation, the law of cause and effect, karma, whatever we want to call it. So it is imperative that we look at what we're doing with what we consider agriculture products. We have this idea that these animals are here for us, which is a pure indoctrination. There's no truth to that. That's just cultural indoctrination, and that so we can do whatever we want to them. We will never be free, ever, as long as we're enslaving, as long as we're exploiting any other, as long as we're exploiting the reproductive system of females, as long as we're controlling families and taking babies away from mothers and things like that. And that is what we're doing in the animal agriculture business, even under the best of circumstances. So it's so important for the freedom movement in particular to wake up, because it just reminds me of Neo when he meets the architect. And the architect, I don't know if you remember this in The Matrix, but the architect says, hey, you've been here 6 times. This is the 7th time you've been here. Or maybe this is the 6th time you've been here. But if we try to reset humanity, but the one thing we're going to hold on to is the exploitation and the killing of animals, we're going to be exactly where we are sometime in the future again. It's just a do loop. And so we have to break this do loop.
Yeah, I would totally agree with everything you just said. It's funny because you mentioned about the libertarian view and stuff of like, I don't take my meat away from me. I want to make my own choice and all this kind of stuff. And I actually came to veganism and libertarian almost at exactly the same time. Like I was learning about libertarian philosophy and vegan philosophy at the same time. And I was like, they're made for each other. These things are a match made in heaven. I mean, like basically the fundamental idea of libertarianism, like if you really go to the core of it, it's the non-aggression principle. It's the idea that, human action should be consented to and that you shouldn't infringe upon another's rights. And you also grant them their own rights, etc. And really, like veganism at its core, that's what it is. You're just saying, I don't have the right to go and take, the baby away from its mother or whatever if I want to, have veal or whatever, or to take the milk from a cow because, I've decided that, even though that milk is clearly for the baby, even though that's clearly for the calf, like I'm going to go in and take the calf away from that mother and no, I'm going to take the milk now. That's now my resource. Like using others as a resource, whether it's humans or animals, is fundamentally wrong. And I'm just really surprised that you don't have more libertarians who kind of see that and go, well, the philosophy is very, very similar. It's just don't use other people as a resource and don't take their rights away from them and allow people their own freedom. And that goes for animals as well. And I think it ultimately comes down, for most people, it's like an image thing. People who are kind of like on this, who are more like libertarian, more kind of like, I guess more in that kind of like alternative world as well when it comes to media and the things they consume. It's become part of the culture to say, no, veganism, it's antithetical to all these things that we believe in. It must be all these kind of like leftists who, supported all of the COVID stuff and all these people who were on board with the WEF or whatever it is. But when you actually sit down and say, like, tell me what it is about this philosophy, tell me specifically about this philosophy, what it is that's in line with it. And, they'll bring up something ridiculous like saying, oh, well, you want everyone to eat bugs or whatever. It's like, well, okay, first of all, bugs aren't vegan. Like, let's start there. Right. First of all, that's not vegan and nobody agrees with that stuff anyway. And then second of all, nobody's saying you have to eat Beyond Burgers or whatever it is or anything that you think is like a processed food. No one's saying that. I mean, they immediately go to the processed food thing like, oh, you want everyone to eat all this processed food and get sick and have to take pharmaceuticals. Well, no, I mean, like a banana's processed, like fruits, vegetables, legumes, like grains, like these things are great. These things are like good whole foods. And this idea that like, okay, well, you must be just sitting around eating whatever it is Beyond Burgers all day. I mean, I'm partial to Beyond Burger. I don't mind them. I don't have them all the time. Maybe every few weeks I might have one or whatever. Like I'm still alive. I'm perfectly fine. But you don't have to do that. If you're really worried about it, go and eat like fruits and vegetables and, only eat whole foods. Great. I just think that for some reason, this thing has stuck, this concept has stuck where people have associated veganism with, the agenda, quote unquote, the agenda.
Yeah.
And we've got a lot of
clever
work to do, And I mean, I would say like, credit to you for having people like Paul and Lauren Bell on your podcast. Have you had Derek Brose on there?
No, I haven't, but that's a good idea. Yeah.
He's great. He's really kind of been leading the charge on this as well. I noticed you had Will Tuttle on there recently as well.
Will Tuttle. Yeah, I had him for 2 episodes. He just wrote this book called Food for Freedom. It's an excellent book. It really connects all of it. It connects freedom and health and veganism and veganism. He goes through the different stages of veganism. I think another thing that happens, Johnny, is there are a lot of mean vegans out there that are just kind of like biting at the ankles of meat eaters and, just you should all die kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But a true vegan or the ultimate vegan is all about unconditional love and compassion for everyone. Everyone. I also have these arguments on Facebook with vegans who are just really, if you're married to a non-vegan, you need to leave them. It's like, no, don't leave anybody. We need to stay connected. We need to stay connected and influence people as much as possible. But veganism ultimately is the ultimate consciousness. It's do no harm to anyone. And then people go, well, you can't do that. Vegans, you're hurting the mice in the fields and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, do the least harm possible. Take steps every day to do the least harm possible. None of us are going to be perfect in this world. But certainly taking a baby cow, a calf from its mother, or grinding up a baby male chick because it has no utility to the business. These things we want to talk about good and evil. There's definitely what very dark influences there. And, I ask people, who kills children and consumes their flesh? Who does that? Who would do that? And people say, well, that sounds satanic. Well, that's what we're doing. It's almost like a satanic ritual. Every time we sit down and eat an animal, for some reason, people think it's okay to take the life of an innocent baby, as long as it's a chick or a pig or lamb. But then you start talking about, human children. Oh, that's different. That's different. It's all the same. I'm not saying animals are the same as people. In a lot of ways, animals are better than people, but we're not equating all of that. But it is the energy, the idea, the fundamental idea that you, whether it's a human, a pig, a cow, a deer, that you are here for me to do what I want. That is the idea that has to be dissolved. I mean, that's a program in our consciousness that has to be dissolved in order for us to evolve and to create a free world. It has to go. It's it would be, evil.
Yeah. And I mean, we were talking before about how everything that happened with COVID kind of made us understand some of these evils of the past and things like that. And I would say to anyone who was, on our side when it came to COVID, anyone who was saying, this is fundamentally evil, like how can people want to, put these like injections into people that are causing all of these like adverse effects and things like that, and keep people away from their loved ones and do all of these things, tear people away from their family, etc. And it's like, I mean, do you drink milk? Do you eat meat? Because you are that person.
You're doing it.
You are that person in a sense. And it, again, I don't want to be like unfair or kind of dispassionate towards people, because I know that people are under their own kind of like dogmas and their own ways of thinking about the world that they haven't necessarily thought about these topics. But I would just suggest people start thinking about those topics. If you think that it's okay to take a calf away from its mother because you have some right to her milk, which is not made for you. She didn't. You're not the calf, right? This is not something that has been made for you. And if you think, well, I have the right to take this calf away from its mother and drink its milk, and I'm just using one example here, then that mentality is the same as someone who's saying, I have the right to come and inject you with something because I think that it's going to be good for whatever reason I decide.
Absolutely.
We either have the concept of bodily autonomy, we either have the concept of allowing other people to have freedom to their own body, to their own family, and we treat them with kind of like respect and understanding and compassion, or we don't. But for you to say, oh, well, Klaus Schwab is all evil because he wants to put jabs in everyone, but I'm not evil because I want to take a calf away from its mother and take the milk from the mother. Well, where's the difference? I mean, all you've done is you've just drawn a line and said my actions, which really come from the same point, they come from the same kind of like core there, the same root. My actions are okay that I do this, but it's not okay for them to do it. Well, why? Because we're human. Again, it just comes down to, because like, well, they're an animal and you're a human and you can't compare the two. Well, do animals suffer? Because that's the only thing we should be looking at. It's not can an animal drive a car? It's not can an animal write a novel? It's can an animal suffer? Do they have the propensity to suffer? And if they do, then you have to take into consideration any action which you might do to them, which causes suffering. Like, so, when people say, but like animals different. No, like we're only looking at the things which is actually a relevant point of comparison between humans and animals here. So I agree. I think that, we have work to do. And I think it's sad that more people don't see these comparisons, but I really hope that at some point people are going to start making that connection of saying, it's all well and good pointing the finger and saying someone else is evil. But like, at what point do I look at my own actions and say, do I have the same darkness within me and I'm not recognizing it? I think that actually is a big entry to spirituality as well.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing to look at is we really should not be surprised that we're in the circumstances we are. The more I awaken to the world, the more it looks like we are being farmed. You can cull the herd, you can inoculate, you can decide what you want to do with them. You can, spray the air with chemicals. You can do whatever you want to this herd. And there's no surprise that we are having these infringements on our freedoms because we are doing it to the animals. So it's like there's two ways to look at it. We should wake up and go, we don't like this, so we don't want to do it to the animals. The other thing we should look at is this is what's happening to us humans is a result of karma, is a result of the law of compensation. We have put this out in the universe. We keep doing it. There's no surprise that it's coming back to us.
Yeah, that's a really important point.
Yeah, it is an important point. There's another thing I want to say is I have compassion for everybody. We have all been indoctrinated into this system. It is not, I don't care what anybody says. People say, well, humans have been eating meat forever, so therefore we should be able to eat meat. There's so many answers to that. One is, do you do everything that your ancestors did? Mm-hmm. And another, are the circumstances you're in even comparable to your ancestors? And is that even true that your ancestors did that? Because so much is our indoctrination. And we're sitting on our little high chair as babies, and we get that first little bite of ham and peas or whatever, Gerber baby food. We didn't ask for that. Every child, unless they're born psychopathic, if you put them in a room with a little lamb or a baby bunny or a kitten, they're not going to go take a knife and slice its neck. That's just not the nature of us. We will eat the apple over that. We will eat green beans even. We won't, it's not natural for us to do that. But everybody has been indoctrinated into believing that it is natural. And this is one of the first traumas that we experience. And I think that we've all been traumatized. So even the people that are holding so tightly to their meat, they've been traumatized. They've been indoctrinated to believing that what they're doing is okay when it really isn't. And so that's something that needs healing. So I think that's one thing. That's why I have compassion for everybody. And then I think the other thing to always remember is there's an addictive property to meat. And some people, it's like cocaine or something. It's just really something that some people have a really hard time breaking the habit. And so both of those things are working physically and psychologically in the minds of people who hold to their meat as a right. But I actually fundamentally believe in the strength and the wisdom and the discernment and the love of humanity and the ability to make a choice that we can choose differently and just do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had Paul and Lauren Bell on my podcast, and one of the things that they said when they were on was that you can't have a spiritual path without at some point contending with this idea of how we treat animals. That it's such a central thing. It's such a central part of walking the spiritual path, is actually questioning that and actually thinking about it and saying, is this right? And I kind of feel like no matter which angle you go down, all these arguments, because I can already see it now. People are going to comment and say, oh, this stuff that you were talking about, veganism. What about this? What about like the lion who eats the antelope or whatever? Like, are you going to stop a lion eating an antelope? And it's like, okay, well, if you can either do everything the lion does, including, like if you join a new pack, if a lion joins a new pack, it kills all of the cubs, right? Like a lion only wants its own offspring. So it will kill all of the offspring that aren't his own so that it can raise its own adult children, right? I mean, you can look to the animal kingdom for moral guidance, but you're going to live a pretty immoral life if you do that, right? So we can either say, yes, we're like animals, let's do everything like animals do, including, killing the children of another person so that you can only raise your own, or whatever it is. Or, if you're a monkey, maybe you just want to fling feces at someone. If we're taking guidance from the animal kingdom, why not? Let's take it all. You can't pick and choose, right? But then at the same time, people will say, well, we're different to animals. Like, we're different to animals, and that's why it's okay for us. Like, we're better than animals, and that's why it's okay for us to use them for food, or use them for entertainment, or use them for whatever the thing is, because we're better, we're more evolved, we're more whatever. And it's like, well, you can't have it both ways. You can't on one hand appropriate yourself to a lion and say we're just like animals, and then at the exact same time suddenly pivot to the argument and say, well, no, we're nothing like animals, and therefore we have a right to enslave them. Like the arguments break down at every point, but people don't think about them deeply enough. I think because people are afraid to change their behavior, because it's a scary thing. Like, it is a scary thing. I mean, I'm not sure, Carol, how long you've been vegan, but like, I've been vegan about probably 8 or 9 years now. And, it's a difficult thing. It's a really tough thing to do. Like, you're changing your entire paradigm. You're changing, like, your friends think you're weird. Your family think you're weird. Everyone thinks that you're going to die of malnutrition within 6 months. Like, all of these things happen. And it's a difficult decision to make, but that's the thing. I think this is another important thing is, are you willing to walk the hard path? And people think, and, people have done this, right? Like, people in the freedom community have done this. When it came to COVID, we walked the hard path. It was the hard thing to do was to resist, going down with all of this kind of like nonsense, and swallowing the lie, and getting the vaccine, and wearing the mask, and doing the social distance thing. Like, it was important during that time to say, I'm going to stand on my own convictions here. And that's why I still hold out a lot of hope that people in that community are going to come around to this, because I think that they're not, for all of the, whatever personality traits that people have and the reason they don't go vegan, I think that the one thing that is possessed by people in the freedom community is they are willing to stand on their convictions. They are willing to do something which is walking the hard path if it is in line with truth. And I really hope that more people will come to these ideas, think about these ideas of how we treat animals, think about the things that you've been saying, in terms of like, how can we expect to be free if we are enslaving others? And actually think deeply about those matters. And if they come to the conclusion, which I hope people do, which is we shouldn't be doing that, we shouldn't be enslaving and causing suffering to other beings, is to actually stand on that conviction and say, I'm not going to walk away from this. I'm not just going to walk away from this idea and hide away from it and pretend that I haven't come to this idea because I want an easy life, but to say, no, I will take the hard path. I am willing to do these things. I'm willing to follow that truth and that conviction.
I hope so. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful vision. I've been thrown out of a few Facebook pages, unfriended or just blocked just by asking the simple question, how can we expect to be free as long as we're enslaving others? And I've seen a lot of intolerance, but that could be a very small minority. And I do think we're in the process of an awakening. And to me, the one prayer that I have, the one prayer that I have is, I want to awaken to whatever is next for me to awaken to. Show me what I have not yet seen. And I keep getting shown more and more. And if we commit to something like, I am really willing to wake up fully, then we will be on this path, and we will hit this juncture where we have to face it. I do agree that if you're on the spiritual path, this is something that needs to be faced. That being said, there are many spiritual giants in the world who will not look at it or have their own excuses. And it's like, what? How can that happen? I was just shocked at a lot of my peers and how they reacted to COVID. And I'm equally shocked about how they react to the idea that we need to free the animals. So there's something in our psyche that's asking for integration of all of it so that we really can, as we started the conversation, really can be on the path to this Christed being. We cannot not face it. We have to look at it.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, there is so few people. I mean, you're already taking a serious minority of people who have kind of seen through the COVID stuff and who have kind of really aligned themselves with freedom there. And then to find people within that who see the same thing that we're doing to animals and say, okay, I'm not just going to look at this from the macro level, what's happening to me. I'm going to look at the micro level. I'm going to look at my own life and what I'm doing to others. The amount of people who've gone that extra step is even fewer. So, it's really nice to talk to someone like yourself who has done that.
It becomes a very small group. On the other side, the vegan community, there was just a huge disappointment and a shock that so many in the vegan community went on along with the narrative of the COVID narrative, because activists have spent decades questioning pharma and the government and all of this stuff. But when it came down to being afraid for your own life, that's when we saw where people really lined up. And it was really shocking to see some of the vegan community go into the, jab me up and I'm on the side of the government and corporations now. I think we're still reeling from that. So our little vegan group has gotten into vegans for freedom.
Yeah. I mean, I had I had an argument with a guy. Should I name him? I won't name him now. Anyway, he's a very prominent vegan advocate. And he was basically saying, like, he'd been so consistent throughout his entire career. And the vaccine came out and he did an article basically saying, that it's okay to get this even though the vaccines aren't vegan, because the vaccines apparently were not vegan. Apparently they contained
some said they were at first, but they weren't.
It sounded like they weren't. I know there was kind of like mixed views on it, but at the very least, development of this vaccine, it was using like chimp DNA or something. Anyway, all this weird stuff. I mean, don't get me started on that. But anyway, he was saying he did this whole article saying, I know that I've been advocating vegan forever and this vaccine's come out now for COVID, but you should all take it because it's going to save lives. And I'm like, well, hang on, like, if you're going to hold that position, you might as well be in favor of vivisection and, like all kinds of, like any kind of animals being used in medical research. You can, like, that now passes. Animals being used for, things like riding animals and using them to save people from like walking. Because, what if you get a bad back? No, of course you need to ride the camel or whatever it is and exploit a camel. Like, you've just opened the door to basically every form of animal exploitation by saying that. So those vegans, especially who were really solid, and then suddenly the vaccine came around, they were like, take it for the greater good. It's like, you've literally just undermined your entire philosophy. Like, it doesn't matter if it's going to save lives. The fact is, you don't exploit in the same way that we don't exploit humans for experimentation in order to provide, whatever it is. Humans have to consent. Animals cannot consent. They can never consent. So we shouldn't use them in any kind of medical experimentation. I just wanted to interject the conversation here because we were talking about this article, and the reason that I didn't want to go too much into the article is because I wanted to kind of refresh my mind before I made any absolute claims about it. But just to be a little less cryptic here and give some context about the article is called, "Do Vegans Who Get a COVID-19 Vaccine Abandon Their Moral Principles? Yes or No?" And the article is by Gary Francione, who is a professor of law at Rutgers University and has written a lot about the ethics of veganism. And I generally think that he has a very, very good body of work. But when it came to this article, I definitely felt like it was a cop-out. And I'll try to be brief here, but I think there's one paragraph in particular that sums up his point, where he says, "But what about situations in which we need to take some medication that has animal ingredients? Assume that you are dying and that your only choice of survival requires that you take a pill that has an animal ingredient. Is it morally justifiable to take the pill? No, it is not morally justifiable. It violates the right of an animal to not be used exclusively as a resource. But is it morally excusable? It may be. If you are able to get the pill without the animal ingredient from a compounding pharmacist, then you should do so. If, however, you cannot get the pill without the animal ingredient and there is no other alternative to using the pill with the animal ingredient, then your taking the pill is excusable. What you're doing is not morally okay, but you don't really have a choice. You are not advocating for the institutionalized exploitation of animals. Indeed, you are a vegan, you oppose that exploitation, but you are dying, you need the pill." And I guess I should give the following paragraph as well, where he says, "The same analysis applies to the COVID-19 vaccine. COVID-19 is a nasty virus. It kills people." And he goes on to give a bunch of totally exaggerated and absurd descriptions of COVID-19, but summarizing in the point, in sum, getting the vaccine is not morally justifiable. It may, however, be morally excusable. So in fairness to Gary Francione, he doesn't really try to push the vaccine down people's throats or say that they should take it. But at the very least, I think his completely hysterical and out of proportion interpretation of the risks when it comes to COVID-19 seemed to me to betray his philosophy when it comes to veganism. Because even if you do hold the view that if you are dying and that you need to take something which has been derived from an animal in order to survive, okay, it's a very specific circumstance and you can debate around that issue. But if you're going to write an article giving people moral permission to take a vaccine, it would seem to me that you should do at least some very honest research when it comes to the risks of COVID, rather than taking a very big diversion from the ethics that you've been professing your entire life, based on the hysterical and provably wrong assertions being made about the virus by mainstream media. All right, this interjection went on a little bit longer than I'd intended, so I apologize about that. I don't normally do these interjections, but it did feel like it was necessary for the context of the conversation. All right, let's get back to the conversation. I throw criticism in all directions at the end of the day. Like, I criticize freedom community people for being very dogmatic when it comes to, no, we should eat meat and vegans are all, socialists and, they all support Bill Gates stuff. And I also equally criticize vegans who fell in line with all of the COVID stuff and, didn't give a second guess as to the vaccine or ask whether it was tested on animals or exploited animals and stuff. I think that just hold consistent values, that's always what I'm trying to do. And I know that I fail. I'm not pretending to be some kind of saint, but what else are we doing here if we're not trying to come to a firm understanding of our values and advocate them and be consistent on them, even if that's a hard path, for me, that's what the spiritual path is about. I think that that's heightened my connection, that spiritually speaking, is saying, I'm going to look at the truth of a situation and I'm not going to shy away from it. And I'm going to try and be consistent. And if that means that I'm taking a hard decision or a hard path, I accept that, and I think that, personally, I think that that's an important thing for people to think about, vegans and freedom community people. We need to just be consistent on what we value and what we advocate.
Yeah, I completely agree. I love the way you compare or you talk about how one of the things that's really cool about the freedom communities, we really took a beating and stood by what was right. And it wasn't easy. And this isn't easy either. So let's just walk the hard path. It's a narrow path. Mm-hmm. And let's get as many people on that path as we can.
Yeah, exactly.
I really think that the salvation of humanity depends on this. I mean, I really do. I think it's pretty serious. I don't think it's just kind of it's something that we should do. I mean, I really feel like if we're going to escape the matrix, the control matrix, this is a key part of it, and we've got to face it.
Yeah, totally. Let's just move on to the final section. I just want to ask you about, there's a lot of talk at the moment amongst people, I guess more in the Orthodox camp of Christianity and stuff like that, talking about that we're going through the end times, that this is, the things that we're seeing, COVID and all these lies and transhumanism and AI and transgenderism and all these kind of things, that they are all part of this kind of antichrist system, or this, the beast system. People talking about digital currencies and, you won't be able to spend money without the mark of the beast and all this kind of stuff. What do you think about all of that? Do you think there's any truth to it, or, is it maybe a bit more in a metaphorical sense? How do you approach all that stuff?
Yeah, I've never been one to really focus a lot on end times. And I think a couple of things I want to say about it. There have been so many times in history where people have thought we're at the end times. Many, many, many times that things have never been so bad. That's the end times. And we've seen cults, get fooled by that. We've seen that. So we just don't know. And are there end times? I don't know. What I do know is the more we dwell on it, the more we imagine it, the more we talk about it, the more likely we're going to manifest it. So if we put our energy into it, we will make it happen. I think that's the way it works in the world, what we put our energy into. And so I think a lot of the conversations about these things, a lot of the focus on what's happening and, oh, it's so horrible and, oh, it's so scary and this is what's happening. It's putting pictures in our mind, and we put pictures in our minds and then we get afraid and then we start imagining it. And that is a co-creative process. We will create that reality if that's what's in our mind. So I really feel like what we should be doing is imagining other outcomes. Imagining being free, imagining all the animals being free, imagining what it would be like to be free. Would we have governments? How would we organize ourselves? How would we really express our love and creativity if we had unlimited ability to do so? I think the more we put our energy into those kinds of ideas, those kinds of pictures, the more likely we're going to create something else. So I don't know if that satisfies what you're looking for, because I really don't want to go, here we are. Yep, we're all going down now. I just, it's possible, but I think we have complete control.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. No, you don't necessarily have to agree with the take. I had a recent conversation with a guy called Rick Munn. I'm not sure if you've heard the name, but he's very strong on the on this stuff. He really thinks that we're going into it and stuff. And you have a different take. And yeah, I have no idea. I think that I can see signs. I guess my take on this is that, like, I think that these kind of, I don't want to call them elites, but these people, the string pullers in the world, I think that they like to play into the public psyche about this stuff. I think that they're almost just kind of like fanning the flames. For them, it's almost just like they're trolling us. I don't know if you saw recently, there's the King Charles in England. He's had like this.
Okay, his portrait?
Yeah, you've seen the portrait. So it's like if you turn the portrait in a certain way and you put it together and you kind of like interlace it, like it suddenly looks like the devil with horns. And it's like he's got this picture where it's like everything's completely red, like a blood red color. I literally think that they do this as a joke, like I think that they're trolling us.
I do too.
Yeah.
I do too. Yeah, let's see what they notice here.
Yeah, I mean, people look at it and they go, they're like, this is the real end time stuff. I think that no, I think they've read the Bible. They kind of, they know about all this revelation stuff, and they just say, how can we just occasionally sprinkle it in just to get people going crazy? Because if anything, it adds power to them. I mean, what I would rather with all of these people is that we just laugh at them and ignore them and move on and do different stuff. I mean, when they try and bring in the digital central bank digital currency or whatever, we just go, yeah, not for me, and then we just do our own thing. I mean, but the problem is if you give it all of this weight to it and say like it's end times and these are the antichrist, and it almost just gives these people an undue kind of amount of power that I don't think they should have. So I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong. It's just that I kind of think more like let's not give them more power than they deserve by saying they're the Antichrist. Let's just say they're a bunch of clowns who are trying to control society and will ultimately fail.
Yeah, it goes back to what I said at the beginning, that evil doesn't have power in itself, just the power we give it.
Yeah.
So we give power to them and their ideas for humanity by giving them our consent with our own thoughts and our imagination. And why not go to Isaiah, where the wolf lies down with the lamb? And here we're going to create a world where we have peace again, and where animals aren't eating each other and people aren't eating animals. And, why not imagine what that world would be like? Imagine a world without these powers that shouldn't be, or elites, or whatever we want to call them out, controlling us. And, that's a world where I talk about this a lot on my podcast, where we just need to learn how to not be obedient to authority. And I know you probably got that a lot from some of your podcast guests, Paul and Lauren. But we've been so conditioned, and I see it so much clearer than I used to, so conditioned to looking to authorities to fill in the gap. And it also comes back to what I said in the beginning too, because we haven't honed our intuition. We haven't honed our discernment. We haven't gone inside of ourselves and said, okay, the divine voice in me is what determines my next step, not pharma, not corporations, not government, not this, not that. And so we really had to fundamentally shift humanity to envision a wonderful future and create it out of whole cloth, and B, recognize that our divine power is within and that we can self-govern.
I really like that. Just real quick, what's the name of the Isaiah's story that you're talking about with the lying down with the wolf and the lamb?
Oh, the scripture? Oh gosh, I'd have to remember the scripture.
Well, that's all right. Just
let me look it up.
If you can tell me after. I just want to
we can put it in the.
Yeah, I'd like to put it in the notes. I'd like to read it myself as well. So
Yeah.
All right, cool. Actually, speaking of scriptures, one more question on that. Where can you recommend where someone would start reading it? Because I'm someone who's tried to read the Bible. I mean, I did kind of have a semi-religious upbringing. Like I went to a Church of England school and we did prayers and all this kind of stuff, but it wasn't very full on. It was just kind of in the background stuff. But I want to read the Bible, and I picked up a copy of the was it the King James version? Is that
wow. Okay.
Is that the one?
Yeah.
Anyway,
that's kind of a traditional version.
Yeah, people were saying just go to a traditional thing, and I tried reading it, and I don't know, I just really struggled. And I know everyone says differently about like how to read scripture and stuff. A lot of people have different ideas, and they say, "Oh, don't just try and read from the beginning, like pick it up and flick to a page or whatever." What's your take on that? Like, how do you think is the best way to kind of get in reading this stuff?
I don't know. You can get lost in the Bible. I've read not all of it, but a good amount of it, and it is tedious. First, let me ask you, why do you want to read the Bible?
Because I think that there's value there. I think that it's had such a mark on society and culture that I think there's inherent truth within it. That's the main reason.
Yeah. So I mean, in Unity, as a Unity minister, we teach people to look at the stories in the Bible metaphysically. So we look at these as these stories where they may have happened historically. There is a historical context, but we look at them more as characters and aspects of our own self. So if I'm looking at, for example, the book of the story of Moses and freeing people from Egypt and going to the promised land, that all of those characters are aspects of my own self, my own psyche. And that's how I've been kind of trained to look at Bible stories. So I look at them through the lens of my own spiritual development and who am I? And it's another way of looking at the Bible very richly. So as you read through the stories, you may want to learn how to look at it that way. I would just read it front to back then, but recognize that like the book of Job was written before anything. And the book of Job is very tedious. You're going to read 40 pages of a man suffering. It's like, oh my gosh, he suffers and suffers and suffers and suffers. Ultimately, he comes to recognizing that God is the one power in his life. So, it's a story about that. So I think that it's interesting to look at all of the stories, and you can look at them in the historical context, but also look at them kind of metaphysically, who am I in the story and what does it mean to me? And what is it really telling me spiritually? But you're going to get stuck. You're going to get stuck in a lot of tedium about how to slaughter an animal, for example. And you're going to go, what? Why is this in here? And this is where I say the Bible was written by men. And there is actually, when you look at it, there is actually a battle between the meat eaters and the non-meat eaters. And you will see it over and over again. The ones that are talking about God wanting to kill the animals and the one saying God does not want slaughter. It's very, very interesting.
That is
now,
interesting.
I would recommend you read a book called Gods in the Bible by Mauro Viglino. He is an Italian. I've been trying to get him on my podcast. It's not working yet. He was a translator in the Vatican, and he will put, you probably should read the Bible first, the Old Testament first, and then read what he has to say. He has a whole different interpretation of what all those stories were about that will just put everything on its side and completely change everyone's understanding of who God is in the Bible. So it's a really, really good book to read after you try to reconcile this loving God with this warring God. It's really kind of hard to reconcile those two.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Just have you heard about this documentary that's recently been made called Christspiracy?
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
How is it? I've not seen it yet.
Well,
You don't agree?
No. It's not that I don't agree. It's not that I don't agree. I do agree. I just wish that it was made in a way that I could share with traditional Christians. And I think it was made in a way that was more appealing to the vegan audience, the people who already wanted to hear the message.
I see.
That's my only concern about it. I feel that if I were making the movie and I wanted to change the hearts of Christians, I would have done some different things that they didn't do. I feel like what it's done is more to convert vegans to Christianity than Christians to veganism.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing it anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to know what you think about it. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me that Jesus, if you believe Jesus was a son of God, or if you believe Jesus was a Christed being, if you believe Jesus was the ideal human, that he would not have killed an animal and eaten its flesh. It just makes sense, because in line with Genesis, where God created everyone and everything and loved all of it, and then said to humanity, "Here, you take care of it." That essence, that energy, wouldn't slit the throat of a lamb. And I would also say this is my latest original thought to all Christians who believe that Jesus is the good shepherd. You better hope he's vegan, because if he's the good shepherd and you are the sheep, you better hope he's vegan and he wants to take care of you and not slit your throats.
Yeah, because like I said, I have started reading the Bible and stuff, and so far, up to the point I am in so far, it's not kind of got too late in it, and it is still. I think there was something in there about everything provided to man, like the seed of the earth will be provided to man to eat, or something like that. I've already kind of got past the point where that has been talked about in the Bible, but I haven't got to the part yet with Jesus. Jesus has not even arrived yet
Right.
Since what
Jesus comes
what
much later.
So, and so I'm interested to know how that transition goes, because, we hear about Jesus, I don't know whether he necessarily slaughters an animal, but certainly I think that, was he a fisherman at some point or something, or he had some involvement in that?
Yeah. I mean, I can refute every single one of them.
Sure,
I did a whole podcast
I'm not
on
suggesting it's all necessarily true.
Yeah, I mean, there's Jesus. People say Jesus ate fish, so I can eat meat. Jesus ate fish. It's like, well, there's so many problems with that logic. Jesus did a whole bunch of things. Would you do everything that Jesus did? For one thing.
Well, yeah, but isn't that the point?
There also is.
Isn't that the point, that Jesus was living the ideal or the life we should ascribe to live?
Well, yeah, but I mean, Jesus was also in another time, another era, and another. I don't know what food was available, but I do think Jesus was most likely vegan. There's so much evidence for it.
Oh, okay.
So it doesn't say that he. The scriptures that people cite are that he multiplied fish and bread and fed a lot of people. Right. But the evidence is that fish was added by a scribe. The evidence is that the term fish was misinterpreted. And if you think about it, there's a time where there's 5,000 people or 4,000 people. There's two incidents. One's 4,000 and one's 5,000. And people are hungry, and he's talking. So he figures out a way to feed them. He blesses his baskets of fish and bread and multiplies it, and everybody is fed. So, you can look at it metaphysically. It's just everybody was fed. Everybody was spiritually fed. Somehow everybody got fed. People stayed to listen. If you want to look at it literally, I just don't... I've seen so many movies where they show this, where they're passing these baskets of fish and bread, and everybody takes the bread, but everyone passes on the fish. And what are you going to do? Pick up a fish and just start eating it? Nobody does that in the movies, because it really wasn't there. You would have to get a little hibachi out and cook it or something. It was added by the scribes later. So
interesting.
That's one thing. They said that he helped two of his disciples, before they were disciples, he helped them get a big catch of fish. But if you look at the scripture, if you look at what was written, what it really says is they got this big catch of fish, and Jesus said, "Come with me and become fishers of men." And that's the last we heard. They there was no pulling the catch in and selling it, and then I'll be with you in a few minutes or tomorrow, Jesus. It was like, that was it. They left that catch and they went to become fishers of men. So you could say that he was converting he was converting fishermen away from fishing. So, and then the other thing he did was he freed the animals in the temple. And this is really right before he got killed.
Yeah.
And that he went into the temple, and I didn't learn anything new from Christspiracy on this, because I've talked about this. I've talked about this from the pulpit when I was a minister. He went in and he freed the animals, and he said, this is a den of thieves. You've made the house of God a den of thieves. And in Christspiracy, they find the translation of the Hebrew word for thieves to be murderers. And that's very possible. But also, if you look at natural law, the term thief covers murder. It covers everything. It covers lying, stealing, murder, all of it. So it was a den of thievery. Everything that was going on there was taking from people and taking lives from animals, and all of it. So those are the three things that people point to. Also, if Jesus, the resurrected body, he eats a bite of fish to prove that he's actually physical. And that's probably the most, quote, damning evidence that Jesus ate fish. But I think that's also a story that was told to just say Jesus resurrected. So anyway, I think if you just look at, if Jesus was the Son of God, if Jesus was a Christed being, would a Christed being actually take the life of the lamb that he's protecting? And I say no. It just doesn't make spiritual sense.
Okay, cool. Yeah, there's a lot there, and I don't even know about some of these stories, so I need to read about it. I need to watch Christspiracy and make my mind up on it. But for me, it's kind of relatively inconsequential because, first of all, I'm not like an Orthodox Christian or anything like that would just go with anything. I think that I always try to just figure out, okay, well, what makes inherent sense to me, and if there's like fundamental contradictions, then I just say, okay, well, if there's a contradiction there and it's against another value I have, and we're just saying, well, it's just because it's an animal, I wouldn't appeal to the Bible anyway. I think it's kind of a weak thing to just appeal to the Bible and just say, well, Jesus did it. Like, unless, like you said, like if you are an absolute Orthodox Christian and that's all you do, fair enough. I'm not that person. So I wouldn't do it, but it's very interesting to know there's so much debate happening about this and I think that the Christspiracy film is opening up that debate because, yeah, I mean, the TLDR for the audience, I've not seen it either, so this isn't a spoiler, but like, I guess the concept is that one of the biggest, the reason that Jesus was killed was because he wanted to help animals, because he wanted people to stop eating them. That's essentially, I think, what the documentary is saying. Am I right in that, Carol?
Yeah, I think so. And I don't really subscribe to that. No. I think Jesus was a threat to the power structure in a number of ways. Sure. And anybody who's a threat to shutting down the temple operation, that was an elite operation, was a threat to the establishment. And the freeing of the animals was certainly a part of it. I don't know if it was the ultimate cause. He threatened the power structure, period. And that's also something that, the freedom movement would kind of identify with. But the power structure that we have includes corporations and includes agribusiness. And, these are things that we would ethically want to be a threat to.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I guess I should wrap this up, Carol, because we've been going for quite a while. You've been very generous with your time, so I appreciate that. I guess, first of all, I just want to let people know where they can find you, where they can find out about your work and your podcast and all the rest of it. I would definitely recommend people check out the Spiritual Forum podcast. It's really awesome. There's just so much there. There's so much like variety there. I really like the fact that I can tune into your episodes and every single one of them is different to the last and has, different ideas, different people and, different takes. And, it really kind of, some podcasts, they stick on the same topic for a long time and eventually you just kind of like, I feel like I've heard it, but I always feel like I'm getting something fresh from yours, which is great. Let people know where they can find you and also just any parting message that you have for my audience as well.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Johnny, for having me on. This has been a great conversation. It's always nice to find kindred spirits in this little tiny minority group that we're in, that we envision will expand and grow. I think the parting message I would have is just that during these times, whether they are end times or just times that we're going through. I think what we're really facing is this juncture, and we can go into the material and the physical and the AI and all of that, or we can choose the spiritual path, which is the hard path. And that means we stay fully human. That means we look at all of our inconsistencies. That means we look at all of our indoctrination and try to release all of it and start fresh, anew, with values and practices that are in line with our values. And that includes how we treat everyone and to live a life of compassion and connection. I guess the last thing I would say is I think it's really important during these times to stay connected with people and to not cut people off. And even if you have massive disagreements, to do what we can to keep our hearts open so that we do stay connected. It's the only way we can really influence people.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that message. And yeah, thanks again for coming on, Carol. Speak to you again whenever the next time is.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much, Johnny. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise. See you.